So in this video we'll look at how to create Snort rules, how to run Snort rules, how to troubleshoot your rules, how to create your own little experiment where you're running a couple of VMs and showing how Snort works, and also how you will use a packet capture file to use Snort to do your next assignment. So let's see how we would configure our snort.conf file and create some rules to implement our security policy. We want to make sure that our home net and external net are correctly set. In this case, my home net is natted, and I suggest that you do that, is you nat your home address and another computer running in a VM so that you can actually access the internet from your VMs. And so mine happened to be natted, the home net, which is an Ubuntu 10 desktop system, to 10.130.3.30. Notice that I'm not using a subnet on here. I'm only using this as a single computer, so that's my only trusted computer. Makes things a little more fun. My external net I'm setting to anything that's not my home net. So even if it's on the same subnet, it's not going to be trusted. So we're really locking down this system. Then we want to go to our snort.conf file where we've set up our home net and external net, and comment out all of the rules except myrules.rules. And this is just so Snort runs a little faster, and also so that we can troubleshoot our rules should we have any mistypings or misspellings. And finally, we want to create a file under the etc snort rules directory, and we want to call it myrules.rules. And we want it to contain and implement the following rules and implement the following policies. We want to alert for FTP traffic from any IP address coming in from the external net, that is anything that's not .30. Second, we want to alert for the content terrorism that's outgoing from our home net. So notice here we're talking about FTP traffic coming in from the external net. Here we're talking about content outgoing from home net. And finally, we want to alert for any pings incoming from our external net. Let's see how we do that. So we want to open up our snort.conf file, the configuration file, and let's search for home net. Keep hitting in until we find it. Notice that these are all comments, so if we wanted to use one of these values set for the variable home net, we could. All we have to do is uncomment the line. And there's where we've got home net set, and that's not what we want, so we can delete that. And we want to set that to 10.130.3.30. That defines our home network IP address. And the easiest way to set our external network is just to add an exclamation point, a bang, to $homenet. We have to include the $sign in here because we want HomeNet to be evaluated to its value, which is 10.130.3.30. So don't forget that right in there. Finally, let's search for the word include. Keep hitting in until we get to the appropriate section. And here we're setting up our rules that are going to be read into Snort and applied against the packets that are coming across the network. Notice that all of these I've commented out. And normally we wouldn't do this, but all it says to Snort is to ignore these rules. And we need to add one line in here, and I've just put mine at the bottom here. Notice all these rules have been commented out. It says include, and the value for the rule path is etc snort rules, and that was listed up above. And then I've listed myrules.rules. So those are the rules contained in the myrules.rules file are the only ones going to be read in and applied by Snort. Let's save that and quit. And then let's create the file myrules.rules. It's an empty file. So let's create a comment that says these are my experimental rules. And let's switch back here and look at our first policy. We want to alert for FTP traffic coming in from the external net. And so it just so happens that our Ubuntu 10 system has FTP running, and we don't want anybody from the external net coming in. Of course, this is kind of a silly example here, because we would obviously, why would we be running FTP if we didn't want anybody connect to it? But let's just work with this right now, because you could always change the values of your external net and home net to allow specific IP addresses to access that service. And so we want to alert FTP use, because we're looking at port 21. It's going to be TCP, and then we need to identify our external net here, the value of that net, and because it's going to be incoming, it's going to be a client-side port, and we can't identify that beforehand, so that's going to be any. That's going to be any port ranging from 1024 to 65535, and actually it will include all of them here, but typically your client-side are randomly selected ports from 1024 to 65535. It's going to be incoming, notice the way the arrow is pointing, to our home net, to port 21. So we've got part of that written, and that's correct. Now we need to indicate that there's a message that needs to be written to the alert file, which is incoming FTP connection. And notice that's in quotes. Notice the spacing there, it's important. We end that with a semicolon, that's important. There's one more thing we can add to make this a little more specific. On a three-way handshake, that first packet is going to have what type of TCP flag set? It's going to be a send packet. So we can list flags S. So we're looking for the send packet to port 21 to be set. We end that with a semicolon, space, and the old versions of Snort didn't require an SID, a Snort ID, but the new ones do, and they will complain about it. So we type SID and then select an SID that probably hasn't been used yet, so I'm using 10,000 here. Notice I end that with a semicolon, and we have a matching closing parentheses. Notice Vim is really good about that because it shows you that there's the match for the closing brace. Okay, so that looks correct, but what if we made an error in here? I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot this, because you probably will make mistakes just like I do. You might misspell something. Instead of SID, you spell it side. And so let's troubleshoot this. Well, recall, let's actually go ahead and start the service, and I'll walk you through the command line that's used by the service, and then we'll stop the service and then use our own command line to run Snort, because that's the best way to learn how to do it. Don't rely on pre-configured script to learn how to run Snort. Best to do it by yourself. But let's go ahead and start it, and we'll look at that command line. Snort start, and it started, and let's grep for Snort, and let's read off the command line. So notice this is running, notice I typed sudo up here, but it's running Snort. I'll explain why in a second. So the command line starts here, so it lists first the command Snort. The executable resides in user sbin. This -m is setting the mask for new files that are created, and we really don't need to worry about that right now, but realize that the umask, or the mask of a file, has to do with the permissions, and the way you calculate the permissions is for this 027, you take 777, which is full permissions, and you subtract the umask from it. So 7 minus 0 is 7, 7 minus 2 is 5, and 7 minus 7 is 0, which means the permissions for any files created by Snort are going to be 750, and they're owned by Snort. The -D tells us to run in daemon mode. And as you recall in previous videos, we didn't use the -D, and Snort ran from the command line, and then we saw a lot of the Snort feedback actually displaying on the screens. And that's why when we just started the Snort service here, is that we don't see that, but it's running in the background. The -D, as you recall, means write out application level information, which we'll need to see due to our Snort policies. For example, the word terrorism is going to occur in the application level data. The -L specifies where our Snort files, our tcpdump files, and our alert files are going to reside, and so the default for that is variable log snort. We want to keep that. The -U and -G say once Snort runs its root, switch it so that it starts running as user snort and group snort. It's a good idea to run services at the lowest user privilege possible, and so rather than running it fully as root, once it starts running, it drops back down to snort and snort. The -C is telling to read the configuration file for Snort, and essentially is saying run this in intrusion detection mode. And therefore it will read those rules that we've read and then write out any alerts to our variable log snort alert file. The -S means to substitute, and this is saying that home.net should be set to this IP address, which obviously wouldn't work in our instance because that's not what our IP addresses are set up to, but that's okay. We're not going to run this with this configuration file. -I you're going to need because that says what interface to listen to. You want to make sure that you set that correctly. -I eth0. Let's type in ifconfig. Notice that our Ethernet address is set to eth0. Yours may be set to something different, eth1, eth2, whatever. But you need to use the correct address. Okay, so let's stop Snort right now. So let's open another terminal. Let's go to variable log snort directory where Snort log files are kept. Let's take a look at the contents. Notice that there's several tcpdump log files in here. Anytime Snort will alert on something, it will write the raw binary data to the tcpdump file here. You cannot read these because they're binary in an ASCII text editor. You must read this with something that understands the tcpdump binary format, which includes Wireshark, tcpdump, or several other different types of applications. Wireshark is a really good one to take a look at these packets, of course. Notice that the alert file is 0 bytes, and notice that it's owned by owner Snort and group Snort. This is important. If it's not, Snort will be unable to access the contents of this file. It won't be able to read it or to write to it. So if it's not owned by Snort, you can always change it to sudo change owner snort, and then alert. Got that? Okay, so let's make sure that our computers can see each other. Not our attacking machine, but it's just a machine that we want to use for the purposes of this demonstration. So it sees our Ubuntu server. Let's flip back over here. Let's flip back over here to Ubuntu server. Type in ifconfig. eth0 is set to 10, 130.3.28. Let's make sure we can see that other system, our Ubuntu system that's running Snort. That was .30. And it can see it, so we can proceed. Let's go back to our Ubuntu system, and let's try to troubleshoot our alert file. Let's try to troubleshoot our rules file, because remember, I made a mistake in there. If we run this as a daemon, I don't think that it's going to actually show you on screen that you've got something misspelled in there. So let's run this not in daemon mode. user sbin snort. Let's capture the let's do it really simply, just to troubleshoot it first. So we give it the information on the log directory and then the snort configuration file, if I can spell correctly. And we don't want to include the home net because we've already specified that in the snort.conf file, but we need to indicate the appropriate NIC to listen to. We hit enter and all this information flashes on the screen, and notice it says fatal error, unknown rule option SIDE. Whoops, I misspelled something. So let's go back there. And let's change this to SID. Hit enter. And so that looks correct. Let's go back here and run this snort again and see if we get any errors. And it's capturing packets, or it should be once we start throwing some at it. Okay, so let's get out of here. When you hit Control C there, that stops Snort from running, so it will no longer be running. Just to make sure you see that. Notice that it's not running. And now we can go back and run Snort correctly. So let's go ahead and run this and capture the application data. And that should be enough now. Let's make it kind of simple. And we want to come back over here and we want to tail the file alert. Notice it doesn't have anything in it, but the -F means to follow, so anything that's subsequently written to it will show up in the file. And so now we can hit enter. And let's go back over here to the server and let's try to log in with FTP 10.130.3.30. It's trying to log me in as PC, and I know I've got an account over there. And I'm in. Let's go back to our alert file. Boom, incoming FTP connection. And it tells you the date and the time, and it tells you the incoming IP address, the incoming port number for the client side, incoming to our home net, our single computer for port 21. Over TCP, notice the send flag is set. We captured that. It tells you a lot more information, but this is exactly the rule that we created. And so that worked. So what we need to do now is go back and look at our policy. Let's create another rule. We want to alert for the content ASCII text terrorism outgoing from HomeNet. So somebody's, let's say, trying to browse the internet looking for the keyword terrorism. And so we want to create a new rule based upon that. And so let's stop Snort with a Control C. It's no longer running, but we need to change my rules, and that was 1519. So our new rule is going to be an alert and TCP. Why is it TCP? Why is it not HTTP? Well, HTTP runs over TCP, and so you can use 3 keywords in that position, either IP for an IP address, or TCP, or UDP. Since we're looking at probably web browsing, let's just use TCP. And now we're going to switch this up and say HomeNet any. And we say any because this is a client-side port, and we're not going to be able to determine a priori what that is. However, notice now this is going out to the external net. And so we're doing egress intrusion detection. We're looking at stuff that's going out. Why might we want to do that? Well, people surfing for porn, people surfing for wares, cracks, anything like that. We might want to determine who's doing what on our network and actually going out searching for these kinds of things. We're guessing that the port they're going to be connecting to is port 80, which is HTTP. And then we want the message terrorism. In fact, let's put this in lowercase letters, and I'll show you why this is going to be a mistake. So we're going to miss some things. Message terrorism content found. Close quote, and we end that with a semicolon, and then we need to search for the content, terrorism, terrorism. Notice that's in quotes as well because we're looking for ASCII content. Notice the spacing in here. There's no spaces in here, nor after the last quote and semicolon. Now we can have a space, and the SID is going to be 10,001. Ending semicolon and an ending parentheses. Why is this not going to catch everything we want it to? According to this, we're only, well, let's go ahead and see why. Let's save this, and we want to rerun our Snort configuration command line, which is 1530. It's running. Notice that there were no errors. Now let's search for terrorism. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's search Google here. terrorism. Okay, so we search for terrorism, and whoa, look at this. Didn't find it. Why not? Why did that rule not work? Okay, let's stop Snort. Let's go back to, I think it's 1519. This is case sensitive, and we want this to be not case sensitive because it could be a capital T, capital RR, and so on. So we just want the word terrorism regardless of case. How do we find out about that? Well, let's go to man, Snort, and look for case. So man, Snort, and let's search for case. And I've already found out that for some reason in the man pages it doesn't indicate. Sorry, I know this is going quickly, but it doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you in the man page, which just kills me, the correct parameter to use for that. There is a Snort, and perhaps because it's just too much information to fit in here, but it turns out there's a manual page, or a PDF manual that comes with Snort, which I will upload. And as it turns out, that the appropriate flag rather to use with this is simply, let's go over here and let's type no case. No case. I don't know if you can see this. Make it a little bigger there. No case means ignore case. Unfortunately, that's one of the times where I tell people to use the man page and it just doesn't work. Regardless, you understand now that no case means ignore case. Okay, now we can go back up and run Snort. And that's good. It tells us that we need to place the content before no case. So that's fine. This is the way that we're learning here. And so Obviously, if you say no case, you want to have content before that, and then after that, no case. Write and quit. Go back and rerun the rule. It doesn't show any errors. Now let's go back and search for, here we go. Let's go back to our tail file and notice that we had several hits because each time terrorism was showing up in here, regardless of how it's capitalized, is that we got a hit. So terrorism content found. So we got it. Notice that this is coming in from our home net with the client side IP address to Google on port 80. And so we found it. So we're 2/3 of the way there with our rules. So let's stop Snort and let's go back to our policy. And there's a silly little rule, but let's just see how it works because it lets us use ICMP. We want to alert for pings from anything coming in from the external net, that is anything not coming from .30. Okay, that's pretty easy. Go back here and let's open up in our my rules files. We know those two work. So we're going to alert, and recall I said one of the keywords in here could be ICMP. And now let's back to coming from the external net, any port coming into our home net, any port, with a message, we are being pinged. Now, this is the tricky part because ICMP is used to identify troubles with your networking, that is network troubleshooting, and you can have different codes and different types of ICMP packets, and it turns out an echo request, which is what a ping is, happens to be I code of 0 and an I type of 8. And so that identifies a ping. We give it an SID of 10,002, end that with a semicolon, and that with the closing parentheses. And now any ICMP packets coming from the external network to the home network with an I code of 0 and an I type of 8, which indicates a ping, will be alerted with "we are being pinged," sent to the alert file. Write quit. Let's restart our Snort. So, had one error in here, the I type that had a semicolon after that, and that's why it wasn't syntax highlighted. And I changed that to a colon, which is correct, and also I made sure that it has semicolon after it, and now you notice that it's syntax highlighted correctly. And now we can go back and we can start Snort again. We don't receive any error messages. Let's go back to our server. And let's ping, it's pinging. Go back to our alert file. And you see that we are being pinged. And so that worked correctly. Let's stop Snort. And I want you to replicate everything I've done here so you understand how to write Snort rules, how to troubleshoot your Snort rules, and how to in general just understand how everything works. Let's go ahead and let's delete the contents of the alert file. And this will take a second. So be better able to follow it. So we can go back over here and add some of the switches. We're going to run this in daemon mode. Once it starts running, we want it to fall back to running as snort and group snort. And then once again we can tail this file. Let's go back and run this. And notice it's already updating. It's saying we're being pinged because this is still pinging over here. So notice the sequence number continues to increase, but Snort is running in the background, and that's the way you want to run Snort is in daemon mode. And then you can take a look at all the alerts that are popping up in your alert file. So we can go back and we can stop this over here. Now, one more thing we need to learn. So you've replicated what I've done here, so you understand how Snort works, where all the configuration files are kept, how to modify the configuration file so it works. But what I'm going to do for your exercise is I'm going to give you a tcpdump file. And this tcpdump file has various packets in it that I'm going to want you to alert on. And so you ask, well, how am I going to do this? Well, you're not going to run Snort like this. What you're going to do is that you're going to use Snort to read the tcpdump file I give you and then alert on that. Based upon some security policies I'm going to request that you create. So let's see how we do that. So the first thing I'm going to do, and you don't need to do this, but I'm doing this, but I'll show you how to capture packets. tcpdump, and you should already know how to do this on interface ETH0 with a snap length that just 0 says to capture all of the packets, not just the headers. And we're going to write it out to a file called mypackets.pcap. Okay, so now that's listening on the on ETH0 on our Ubuntu machine. So now let's go back over here, and instead of looking for terrorism, let's look for golf balls. I don't know why I selected that. Golf balls, okay. So within those packets we're capturing, we should have some text that says golf balls. Let's go back over here and let's ping some more from here. And we're going to go back and we're going to ping. And so that's going to be captured by tcpdump. There. We can close this out. Control C. And so now we have a file that's comprised of 670 packets received by the kernel. 0 packets were dropped. And so what we can do now is we can have Snort read those configuration files and act in intrusion detection mode, but instead of reading from the interface, it's going to be reading from mypackets.pcap. Okay, what I want to do is I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to delete everything from the alerts file. So the alerts file is 0 bytes. And now I want to run Snort in intrusion detection mode, but instead of using the interface, I'm going to be using the PCAP. But first, let's add some rules about golf balls. So let's go back up and add a rule. Alert. It's going to be TCP again. And let's capture HomeNet any going out to the external net, because we don't want people shopping for golf balls or surfing for golf ball prices at work. Net to port 80. Message for golf balls. And do we want a no case here? Well, first we need to include the content, which is going to be golf balls. And the no case argument, correct? And the SID 2003. And that looks correct. Let's make sure Snort isn't already running. And it is running, so we need to stop that. Okay, make sure it's not running. And it's not. And now let's go in and let's look at the man page, and hopefully this will show this. Search for read. We move down a little bit and we see -R tcpdump file. Read the tcpdump formatted file, tcpdump file. This will cause Snort to read and process the file fed to it. So instead of using the -I0, we're going to type -R and the name of the file. So user sbin snort. We want to capture the packet header information. We don't need to run it in daemon mode. We don't need to run it with user and group snort because we're just reading the my packets capture. We do need to specify where the log file is created. Snort, the configuration file, which puts it in intrusion detection mode. Then the -R and my packets.pcap. Let's go back over here and let's tail the alert file and see if it works. And notice that it read it very quickly. Let's go back up and see what it told us that it was doing. Notice that it says alerts 18 and it logged 18 of those. So not only do we have 18 alerts in our alert file, but there's 18 packets that trip those alerts that are in a new tcpdump file. This breaks it down by the protocol. 100% of the packets were Ethernet and 87% of those were IP4. This shows you the breakdown of TCP, UDP, and ICMP traffic. How many were ARP, and so on. So let's go back up here, and we see in our alert file surfing for golf balls, surfing for golf balls, surfing for golf balls are part of the alerts. And as we move down, we see then the pings were caught. So that gives you, or it should give you, a good idea of how to run Snort, how to configure the snort.conf file, how to write the rules, how to troubleshoot your rules, how to run Snort in daemon mode, and how to do your homework by using the -R option to read the PCAP file that I send you.